Let's envision game day. You're nervous. You could be waiting to take a field before a football or a soccer game, or you could be sitting in a gym listening to the tennis shoes squeak across a basketball or volleyball court. And then you hear it. It could have come from a teammate, a coach, a parent in the stands. It doesn't matter who, but you heard it. Let's go, ladies! But you're not a woman. You're a man. And you start to look around at your teammates and your opponents, and you realize that they look nothing like how you feel about yourself. And then you realize that every minute that you're participating in athletics is a reminder that your gender identity is being completely erased. From the way that the women's cut jerseys awkwardly fit on your body, to being in and out of the women's locker room, to participating under the title of women's division sports. This is a glimpse of what it's like to be transgender. Not just in sports, but in everyday life. Often we're only given the choices to pick between being a man or a woman, and sometimes one option doesn't fit quite right, or neither really feel accessible. So what happens? You struggle. I struggled. I came to college in fall of 2011 as a bright young woman. I had grown up playing sports all my life. I dabbled in some baseball and basketball, but mostly played soccer. And when I got to college, I heard about the women's rowing team, and I thought, oh, I could try out. I didn't even know that the seat slid in the boat, let alone what exactly I was getting myself into. But I tried out and I made it. Becoming a collegiate athlete was something that I still hold as a high accomplishment to myself. And all of a sudden, I had a built-in set of friends, teammates, and people that understood that sometimes I'm too tired to hang out and I would rather nap than just be around friends. It was a great situation. But as I realized also that I had joined one of the nationally renowned rowing teams. Western Washington University, we were Division II champions for many years at that point. But at the end of my freshman year, we came up a little short. We came in second place, and at that moment I said, I want to be in a varsity boat next year. So in our off-season over the summer, I buckled down and I trained hard. But at the same time, I also realized that I'm a transgender man. And I came out to a couple friends. But I didn't think to tell anybody on the rowing team because I didn't think my gender identity would get in the way of competition and performances. But I was wrong. So when I came back sophomore year, fall quarter, I was did in by the language that I heard everywhere. It followed me from 5 a.m. at the boathouse to every afternoon workout at the gym. Let's bring it in, ladies. Let's grab all the oars, ladies. Let's get hands on the boats, ladies. I felt like every time I heard something, everyone looked at me, but they didn't know. I knew that I needed to come out. So when I came back, winter quarter, I sat down with my coaches and I said, hey, I would love it if y'all could call me Logan and refer to me with he, him, his pronouns. I'd never seen anybody's eyes bulge that big. But they said, okay, we'll give this a shot. So I wrote an email to my teammates. One senior that year replied and sent her support. But otherwise, we just didn't talk about it. About 2 weeks went by, and one day an upperclassman came up to me and said, I don't care what's going on in your personal life. When you're here at practice, this is the only thing that matters. That didn't fly for me. And as the weeks went on after that point, I felt like my teammates weren't even trying to get my pronouns right. It felt like every moment it was just a slip up and move on. There was no correcting. There was no paying attention about how that made me feel. And when we got to spring quarter, one day, we had practice before flying down to California for a regatta. Our coach had gathered us together, and he called me Bob because he forgot my name. I had never felt so humiliated in my life. It was that moment that I decided I didn't want to do this anymore. It wasn't getting any better. Nobody was trying and making an effort to make me feel included after I had asked and told people what I needed. So I saw through the end of the season, and then I quit. The problem is that this is not an isolated incident. This is something that happens nationally because organizations and just general society doesn't really think that people could identify in different ways than being a man or a woman, or sometimes that looks different from what we think it might be. So before we address social norms, stigmas, stereotypes, and gender construction in general, let's break this down real quick. This is a very basic chart. There's many like it online, but this is one that I put together. Some of you might have heard at this point that sex and gender are things that operate on a spectrum. For some people, their identity can be very consistent for long periods of times, and others, they could fluctuate from a day-to-day basis. It looks different for everybody. But what I'm not going to do is sit up here and give you very rigid definitions of what sex and gender are, because I could tell you that sex is what's only in your pants and gender is what's only up in your head, but that's not quite true for everybody. Because some sex It isn't just about what's in your pants. Some people might call their junk something that it isn't, or might use words that aren't even anatomically related. And there's other people still that don't identify with their junk at all, and still some other people that just wish it wasn't even there to begin with, because that stuff's complicated. And gender sometimes isn't about operating between being a man or a woman. There's things in the middle. Some people might fluctuate from day to day, or you could be identified as being gender fluid or genderqueer or something androgynous in the middle. And then there's people that are completely off that spectrum, and that's called agender. It's different for everybody. And I could have another trans-identified friend come up here, and they would give you totally different definitions of what these mean to them, because everybody experiences their body differently. So instead, I'm going to give y'all a radical idea. Only you can be the expert in your own body and your gender identity, because nobody else knows your body better than you do. And nobody can pass judgment or make assumptions about your body or how you present yourself. And you're not allowed to judge anybody else's gender. So you might be thinking, okay, that's cool, but what if somebody has an obvious gender identity? Let me be example A of why there is no such thing as an obvious gender identity. This is how I identify. Hi, I have female parts. There's some that I think are really nifty, and others I wish never even existed to begin with. My gender is more on the man spectrum, but I put my bubble in the middle because some days I'm more fluid or identify just being without a gender. And my expression tends to be on the more hypermasculine side because, honestly, it's safer for others to perceive me as male. And that's a luxury that not every person has. People in the trans community experience violence, oftentimes because other people don't understand how they want to express their gender, and we experience violence because of it. Gender is something that's different for everybody. So you might be thinking, okay, cool, radical idea, but this doesn't work in the real world. Trust me, I know this doesn't work. I live the life. So how do we apply it? So instead of taking on the whole entire world at once, let's do a case study. So if we go back, sophomore year, I quit the rowing team. When I came back my junior year, honestly, I was a little angry, but I was able to create an internship through the university to create a transgender inclusion document for the NCAA, National Collegiate Athletic Association. So I studied mostly Division II bylaws and regulations, and what I found is that the NCAA does allow transgender people to participate, but they operate on a very strict definition of what gender is, and they define gender based on what hormones you have in your body. If you compare this to my radical idea, this is problematic. So you might also be thinking, so how do transgender people participate in the team that they more identify with? So let's talk about this. Let's use me as an example before I was on testosterone. Let's go back to my sophomore year. So for someone who is assigned female at birth, this person can continue to play on a women's team or can play on a men's team at any time. But if someone like me was to start testosterone, I would have to stay on a men's team. So for me, I identify as a man. That seems really easy, right? What about the opposite situation? If you have someone who is assigned male at birth, this person can continue to play on a men's team, but must undergo a full year of medically documented estrogen hormones and testosterone blockers before being allowed to play on a woman's team. It's a double standard. It's not fair. And another thing that you should know is the NCAA gives you 4 years of eligibility to play sports. The average time span for a student to go through college is about 4 years and a quarter or so. You take a year off, you don't get your full years to play. That's not fair for everybody. So when I was doing this research, I sat down and I said, wow, as a trans-masculine identified person, I have a lot of privilege. I can play on the team that I want right away, if that's what I choose, but it's not the same for other people. But if we're defining gender based off what hormones we have in our body, who else are we leaving out? Transgender 101. Not everybody transitions through hormones or hormones or surgery. Some people have a more social transition, a more personal one. It could be choosing to go by a different name or using different pronouns. So, and like those other identities I talked about, genderqueer, gender fluid people, some of them might identify with, say, if you have someone who's male identified, but someone who is assigned male at birth but wants to play on a women's team, but doesn't want to undergo hormones for their transition, they can't play where they're most comfortable. This is a problem. We're leaving out so many other different gender identities, and there's a lot more than 2, trust me. So what do we do about this? It's about changing the language. Language is everything, and gender is something that we can reaffirm just by interacting with someone, basically. If I came up here and said, hey guys, what's up? Nobody would bat an eye. My queer friends out there might be a little angry, but they probably won't say anything. But if I came up here and said, hey ladies, how's it going? I bet you I'd get the or somebody might even leave. Why do we default to using men as gender-neutral pronouns? Something to think about. Who are we leaving out? If we address a general group of people, we could not be addressing everybody's identities. You can help by adapting gender-neutral language, using y'all, campers, friends, students, peers, comrades. It can be pretty fun. I totally advocate gender-neutral language. It's great. But if we go back to my radical idea, another thing you could be thinking is, well, if I'm not allowed to assume other people's gender identities, how am I supposed to know how to use their pronouns? Pronouns is one of the easiest ways you can affirm someone's gender identity. It's really simple. You just go up and say, hey, my name's Logan. I like to use they, them, their pronouns. What's your name and what pronouns would you like me to use for you? It's really simple. And that, they're telling you exactly what you need, and you're giving it to them. Not trying to assume that they need something or something else. But some people don't identify using binary pronouns like he, him, his, or she, her, hers. So here's something you can practice. This is a very short list, not all of them, but these are examples of a few gender-neutral pronouns and how to use them in a sentence. So some of you also might be thinking, they, them, their pronouns, I'm not going to use a plural to refer to someone in the singular. Well, you can take your archaic way of language and go back to Shakespeare and find that he was using hundreds of years ago they, them, theirs to refer to people in the singular sense. It's really simple. It's been around for a long time. And some people have created other gender-neutral pronouns that more fit their identity because there's so many different ways to identify. Sometimes pronouns are a really personal thing for people. So it's about practicing. And it gets really awkward. But if you slip up, it's about apologizing, correcting yourself, and moving on. You don't have to be embarrassed. But you could also be thinking, I'm not going to take the time to learn different pronouns. It's not worth it. Something that I touched on earlier is that violence is what happens a lot in the trans community. People don't want to accommodate us, and people are sometimes scared. You taking a couple minutes to learn different pronouns could save a life. This is Blake Brockington. He committed suicide a couple weeks ago. He was trans-identified, trans-masculine, and also he was black. He not only faced transphobia from an unsupportive family and people who didn't understand his identity around him in his life, but he also faced racism. For a lot of transgender youth, we don't really think it's going to get better. When every day, when we're at home, our parents could completely erase our gender identity, use a birth name instead of our preferred name, could use different pronouns, we could leave a home life, we could walk into a classroom, it's the same atmosphere, no one's acknowledging the person that we see ourselves as. And we could go out into the community, and it could be the same things. We could be participating on a sports team. Nobody is acknowledging our gender identity. And when you get home, you're exhausted. Nobody sees you the way you need to be seen. And for some, suicide is an out. Blake was an activist. Blake not only spoke up for the transgender community, but was also a huge activist for the black community, especially for against police brutality. Blake could have changed so many lives. He could have done so many things, but he only had short 18 years. You can change the world by dedicating a few minutes to practicing using gender-neutral language. Listen to what language you use. Are you referring to people with "hey guys" when it's a general group of people, or are you thinking more consciously? Are you assuming people's gender identities? Are you assuming what they need? It's really basic. If you take a couple moments, you could give years to somebody else. And that's how you could change the world. Thank you.